With that, I am pleased to kick off our second annual Australia Investors Day by welcoming back Allison Britt, who is the Director of Mineral Resources Advice and Promotion at Geoscience Australia, National Geoscience Organization. Allison leads the provision of technical advice on mineral resources to the Australian government, supporting the implementation of legislation and policy development. Current focus areas include attracting mineral investments into Australia and supporting the Australian government's critical mineral strategy. At a time when critical minerals are essential to energy security, defense, supply chains, and the global energy transition, Australia stands as one of the most resource-endowed and politically stable jurisdictions in the world. Today, she'll share insights into Australia's mineral resource base, the strategic importance of critical minerals, and how international investors can better understand the scale and opportunity with Australia's resource sector. Please join me in welcoming Allison Britt.
So I'm on. Yes, sounds like I am. So good morning, everybody. As Stephen said, I'm Allison Britt, Director for Mineral Resources Advice and Promotion at Geoscience Australia, which is our national geoscience organisation, something like the United States Geological Survey, but down under. Really pleased to be back in New York again, even though it is freezing. This is one of the best events, the Australia Investor Day event here, and I particularly want to thank David Batista and Stephen Shipley, OTC Markets Veritas, for inviting me back to speak on behalf of the Australian government today. So just 4 months ago, a landmark bilateral framework was signed between President Trump and Prime Minister Albanese to accelerate the pipeline of priority critical mineral projects delivered by and for the USA and Australia. The $8.5 billion United States-Australia framework for securing supply in the mining and processing of critical minerals and rare earths will deliver a secure US-Australia supply chain for critical minerals required for defence and advanced technologies. Now, it's a bit of a mouthful, the name of this framework, so I'll just refer to it as the US-Australia Critical Minerals Framework from here on. Now, to complement the framework, the US and Australia will take measures over the first 6 months to each provide at least $1 billion in investments towards priority critical mineral projects in both of our countries. To date, $100 million in support has already been given to the Arafura Nolans Rare Earths project in the Northern Territory, and $200 million to the Alcoa Sojitz's gallium recovery project in Western Australia, which is a trilateral agreement with Japan. So with the framework as a backdrop, I'm going to spend the next 13 minutes or so outlining Australia's mineral resources framework, our outlook, our growing strategic linkages with the USA, provide a short rundown on the Future Made in Australia Act, including our new critical mineral strategic reserve, and finally, because I'm a geologist, you get to have a little bit of geology at the end, because geology underpins our physical economy. Now, Australia is a natural partner for the USA as it seeks to achieve resilience and security in critical mineral supply chains through resources investment under this framework. Australia is a mining superpower. We have over 340 operating mines. Mining provides about 9% of our GDP and about 50% of our export income. And about 10% of Australia's workers are either directly or indirectly employed by the mining sector. Underpinning all of this activity is a wide range of mineral production. The box on the right shows Australia as a top 5 producer of 14 mineral commodities, including many considered critical or strategic. Now, that's the current situation, but there's also strong interest in where future mineral supply will come from. And this slide shows Australia's mineral wealth across major and minor commodities, coloured by the number of times that commodity appears on global critical mineral lists. Now, in Australia, it's really important to understand that companies listed on the ASX must report their mineral resource estimates in compliance with the JORC code. Now, this is the Australian equivalent of the Canadian National Instrument 43101 that you may be more familiar with. The JORC code is supported by the Australian government, and it operates under the principles of transparency, materiality, and competence. And it's part of our governance and is a mandatory part of the ASX listing rules. And from these reports, we build our understanding of the national inventory. So Australia holds the world's largest resources of about 9 commodities and ranks top 5 for 14 more. And the latest data shows that Australia's rare earths ranking has gone from number 6 to number 3 off the back of our strong track record in translating mineral exploration into actual tangible discoveries. However, I want you to notice 2 things on this slide when I overlay mineral production onto that inventory. Firstly, many minerals are underproduced. For example, nickel and cobalt, which have been strongly impacted by the rise of Chinese-backed Indonesian refineries. And minerals like vanadium and graphite aren't produced at all yet, despite that huge potential. The second thing I want you to notice is that a few of the minerals overperform, where those arrows are. These are iron ore and aluminium, which are long-established industries in Australia, and rare earths and lithium, which are newer industries that have rapidly grown. So the establishment of all 4 of these industries was backed by strong government support, from aluminium in the 60s to 80s to today's $1.65 billion federal investment in the Eneabba Rare Earths Processing Facility. All 4 show that when capital is available, Australia can scale up production quite quickly. Now, this confidence that investors can have in Australia's resources base is foundational to the partnerships that we need to build if we are to diversify critical mineral supply chains. This slide is the updated US critical minerals list, and it shows the commodities for which Australia has strong geological potential in red and moderate geological potential in the yellow. And this is about 90% of the US list. It's extraordinary. The truck symbols show that Australia is already producing 23 US critical minerals, and the pickaxe shows another 10 commodities that could come online in the near to medium term. Our companies here today will no doubt provide specific examples of potential critical mineral supply chain linkages between Australia and the USA. Now, establishing new critical mineral supply chains between Australia and the USA builds off a strong existing foundation. Australia has a $1.9 trillion economy and a AAA credit rating. The USA is Australia's largest investor, but it's not all one way, with about 20% of Australia's $3.2 trillion pension funds making their way into the US economy. The US is also Australia's largest trading partner. There's $90 billion in two-way trade, with the US running a surplus since 1952. The US-Australia framework, for that critical minerals framework I mentioned before, this will build on and strengthen that partnership and support Australian and American workers, businesses and investors through coordinated investment. Now, domestically, the Australian government is implementing its flagship Future Made in Australia agenda, which is an investment of $22.7 billion over 10 years that reflects Australia's commitment to net zero, strengthening our economic resilience and national security. To grow Australia's critical minerals sector, the government has rolled out a powerful suite of support measures worth billions of dollars, and I've listed the ones relevant to critical minerals on this slide. These include a 10% production tax incentive processing, the Critical Minerals Strategic Reserve that I'll speak more about in a moment, plus various programs, initiatives, funding packages, and a single front door to make investing easier for people. Now, I'm going to take just 2 minutes now to run through 6 very quick slides on some of the ways the critical minerals package is being implemented and who's implementing it within government. You won't catch all the details, but don't panic. These slides are with OTC Markets, and I'm very happy for them to be shared. So I'll start with the Department of Industry, Science and Resources because it leads the Critical Minerals Strategic Reserve and hosts the Critical Minerals Office. The Critical Minerals Office is the central coordination point for critical minerals in Australia and oversees the Australian Critical Minerals Strategy. Austrade is the Australian government's Austrade is the Australian government's trade and investment arm. It plays a crucial role in connecting and supporting business relationships between Australia and our partner countries. And I think many of you already know Mike Holland, who is Austrade's rep here for New York. Now, the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade works closely with the Critical Minerals Office, Austrade, and right across our federal, state and territory governments to build those bilateral and multilateral relationships that are needed for critical mineral supply chains. Now, moving on from government entities to government support mechanisms, first up is the $15 billion National Reconstruction Fund that will diversify and transform Australia's industry and economy. $1 billion is specifically set aside to support the Value Add in Resources program, with projects like Nolan's Rare Earths, Liontown Lithium, and Alpha High Purity Alumina receiving support. Next, the Northern Australia Infrastructure Fund is providing $7 billion for projects in the north of the country, which includes $500 million specifically set aside for critical minerals. And finally, we have Export Finance Australia, who are essentially the government bankers. They administer the $5 billion Critical Minerals Facility, which includes a $1.2 billion for the new Critical Minerals Strategic Reserve, which was announced by the Australian government last year. Now, the reserve will draw on a range of financial tools to obtain supply, sell to demand, and selectively stockpile critical minerals to secure supply chains and stabilise markets for Australia and its international partners. It's backed by $1 billion in transaction capital drawn from our expanded critical minerals facility, alongside a dedicated $185 million for selective stockpiling and implementation. Operationally, it's a Team Australia effort, with the reserves being led by the Department of Industry, Science and Resources, with the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade co-leading international engagement. And as I said in the previous slide, Export Finance Australia is running the commercial side of it. The reserve aims to provide price certainty in a way that's responsive to fast-moving market dynamics, to encourage that crowding in of investment, and to bring stability to markets. It'll be operational in the second half of this year, and it's initially focused on antimony, gallium, and rare earths. Now, on the subject of rare earths, a lot of people don't realise just how many projects are ready for investment right along the supply chain in Australia. Our rapidly expanding rare earth sector boasts 132 projects, including 96 discoveries with inferred resources. Another 30 have been upgraded to demonstrated resources, 17 of which have progressed to further economic assessment, including 3 at late-stage development. Currently, the world-class Mount Weld mine is operational, and downstream capabilities are also growing. The Kalgoorlie processing facility now exports mixed rare earth carbonate for separation in Malaysia, while construction is underway at Eneabba. Early works have commenced at Nolan's, with additional facilities announced for Darwin and Onslow. Lastly, Australian Strategic Materials has an operating metallisation plant in South Korea. Clearly, Australia is starting to bridge the formidable challenges of establishing midstream processing in a complicated supply chain. Right now, there are opportunities for offtake and investment along the value chain, but once operations go into production, these can become limited. So that's why I encourage you to get in early and work with Austrade to secure finance and offtake agreements for projects at earlier feasibility stages. And depending on your risk appetite, I'd make the point that for every project at feasibility, there's another 5 or 6 trying to get there. They also need investment and may provide a lower entry point. Now, we also recognise that building critical mineral supply chains doesn't just happen in Australia. There are opportunities for American investors and companies to work with Australian companies operating stateside. This map shows a range of Australian critical mineral projects in the USA, with some of those companies here today. And finally, I promised you a little bit of geology at the end. Now, in this slide, I want you to notice where Australia's critical mineral mines and deposits are. You can see they're mostly located in clumped up areas together, and that's where the rocks are close to the surface. But we have vast areas of the country where the prospective rocks are covered by these younger barren sediments. And we think about 80% of Australia is like that, and thus Australia's national and state governments are focused on delivering new data, information, tools and new thinking to help explorers find success in these underexplored regions. Now, we call this pre-competitive geoscience because it comes before commercial activity. And in Australia, we provide it for free. Geoscience Australia's current program is called Resourcing Australia's Prosperity. This is a 35-year, $3.4 billion generational investment that aims to accelerate the discovery and responsible development of Australia's mineral, energy and groundwater resources. Unsurprisingly, there's a large focus on critical minerals, but we're also mapping our offshore area for its potential to host energy infrastructure. We're mapping our groundwater to support regional Australia and empowering our stakeholders with uplifted data and information capabilities, including our First Nations peoples. And we're getting on with the job. This map shows that in less than 2 years, we've already completed an impressive array of geophysical and geochemical surveys, as shown in the green, and the orange shows work in progress, with the blue our upcoming plans. As I said before, all of this data is free to our land users. It directly fuels Australia's world-leading exploration success. The most recent data shows that 1 in 4 world-class discoveries between 2017 and 2023 were made in Australia. So when you invest in Australia's mining sector, you're exposing yourself to all of this upside. So it's no wonder that the US-Australia Critical Minerals Framework includes collaboration on geological mapping, which is something that Geoscience Australia and the United States Geological Survey are already doing together under the Critical Minerals Mapping Initiative, alongside our friends at the Canadian Geological Survey. Now, my final slide is to remind you that Australia offers a long mining history, a skilled workforce, and world-class expertise in extraction, processing and R&D. Add to that strong ESG performance, safe and responsible mining, a stable business environment and transparent regulations. This is fueling rapid growth in mid and downstream processing, backed by the Future Made in Australia agenda and by the US-Australia Critical Minerals Framework, which will accelerate the pipeline of priority critical mineral projects delivered by and for the USA and Australia. So now is the time for that strategic critical minerals investment. Oh, got a question? I'll do what I can.
Yeah, good question from the audience. Let me grab a microphone as well.
Yeah, you made a very strong case for Australia. Now, can you compare and contrast Australia to Canada?
Oh, why would I do that?
in the next, in 60 seconds?
Both Australia and Canada are world-leading mining jurisdictions, as everybody knows. Australia has a particular focus on that that pre-competitive. We're very, very strong in that, and we've been doing that probably more comprehensively than anybody else in the world for a number of decades now. Canada also has its programs, but of course different geological factors at play. They've had huge amounts of glaciation. We've had huge amounts of weathering over billions of years. So slightly different scenarios that we need to tackle on that. Both governments are trying to bring in those incentives and support to get those critical mineral projects happening. So there's a lot that we have in common. In fact, I'd say there's more in common than apart. But the geology also differs, so it depends on which kind of critical mineral you're after and what you might have. So an example of that is that both countries have huge lead zinc silver deposits, but there's subtle differences. And so the ones in Australia are actually very prospective for germanium, and that is one of those critical minerals that you can only get as a byproduct. So each offers its strengths, but there's also differences that you would consider depending on what you are specifically looking for.
We have time for one more question.
Yeah, so in terms of trading partners, obviously China is a huge trading partner for Australian resources. We also have a lot of trading resources with Korea and Japan, and sometimes India and other various countries, depending on what the commodity is. But when it comes to critical mineral partnerships, the imperative is to diversify those supply chains. And so then our partners are, of course, the USA, UK, EU, Japan, Korea, Canada, and so forth, to build those supply chains that are not going to be caught up in a monopoly situation. Yeah.
Awesome.
All right, thank you very much, everyone.